we didn't wrestle enough. The idea was to go in there and wrestle, wrestle a guy who likes to box, and I didn't do that. And not quite sure why I didn't do that, but I didn't do that tonight, and I paid the price for it, and he capitalized.
In theory, when a fighter is able to capture UFC gold, it often means that they're the best at that particular weight class. However, even the most celebrated champions eventually lose the title sooner or later. While it's usually surprising when a title reign finally does come to an end, it's all the more shocking when a champion ends up getting thoroughly dominated by the challenger. Of course, on any given night, a competitor can score either a fast knockout or a quick submission, leaving many to wonder if it was simply a fluke. So for this video, we've decided to focus on contests in which a fighter clearly outclassed their opponent for a meaningful period. As always, if you guys enjoy this video, then please be sure to let me know by leaving a like and subscribing to our channel. Now without further ado, and ranked in no particular order, let's take a look at 10 UFC champions who got completely dominated. Number 10. Tyron Woodley, UFC 235. Heading into his UFC 235 clash with welterweight champ Tyron Woodley, Kamaru Usman was in the midst of a 13-fight winning streak and had beaten some of the best the division had to offer. Records aside, Woodley had proven to be a formidable champion with 4 title defences under his belt. As such, he entered the contest as a slight favourite over the Nigerian Nightmare. And while the betting lines may have been close, the fight itself was not. To the surprise of many, Kamaru Usman out-wrestled and controlled Woodley for what felt like every moment of the fight. This was particularly surprising given that Woodley was also an outstanding college wrestler. The longer the fight carried on, the more obvious it became that Woodley simply had no answer for Usman's constant pressure. Usman continued to take down Woodley and pin him against the cage, coasting his way to a decision win. The victory put an end to Woodley's 3-year title reign and awarded Usman the undisputed welterweight belt. Number 9. Dominick Cruz, UFC 207. Dominick the Dominator Cruz is a former 2-time UFC bantamweight champion, whose unorthodox movement inside the cage has made him a challenging puzzle for most opponents to solve. Back in December of 2016, at UFC 207, the Dominator was set to take on an undefeated young prospect by the name of Cody No Love Garbrandt. Though many expected Cruz to win the bout handedly, the result turned out to be very different. When the contest started, to the surprise of many, it soon became apparent that Garbrandt had an answer for Cruz's unusual stand-up game. In truth, No Love made a man who many thought was unhittable look anything but. For the better part of 25 minutes, Cody Garbrandt put on a striking clinic, repeatedly knocking down Cruz while even throwing in a bit of showboating. In the end, it was Garbrandt who won a decisive win to capture the UFC bantamweight strap, in turn handing Cruz his first loss in the UFC. Before we get any further into the video, we wanted to give a quick mention to a company that reached out to us called YourPodPlug. For those of you who don't know, they're a company that sells different coloured wireless headphones called DailyPods. These headphones look pretty much like AirPods. The only difference is they're much cheaper, selling for only $39.99 with free shipping. They also come in a nice variety of colours, which include blue, green, yellow and pink, in addition to the original white, black, red and teal colours. And to top it all off, they also have some great reviews on their website, so we definitely recommend them for anyone who's looking for some great headphones at an affordable price. Again, that's $39.99 plus free shipping. For anyone who might be interested, they've also offered to give 10% off to all our viewers for a limited time only. Just use our code ATM10 at checkout. Now, on with the video. Number 8. Anthony Pettis, UFC 185. Anthony Showtime Pettis was a charismatic champion with an exciting style who's had more than a few highlight reel worthy moments over the course of his career. However, the man who would eventually beat Showtime for the title is the polar opposite in many ways. Rafael dos Anjos is a soft-spoken fighter out of Brazil, and is someone who doesn't rely on flashy kicks to get the job done. The Brazilian native instead prefers to use a combination of volume striking and takedowns to get his hand raised. When the two met at UFC 185, RDA came out as the aggressor, taking down the champion while staying in control throughout the whole fight. Whatever significant strikes that Pettis did land, Dos Anjos simply walked through them, returning fire with a few of his own before taking Pettis right back down. Overall, Dos Anjos kept Pettis grounded and delivered what turned out to be a 5-round beatdown. RDA went on to win the bout to become the first Brazilian lightweight champion in UFC history. Number 7. Mauricio Shogun Rua, UFC 128. Even early in his career, it was apparent that Jon Jones had a very bright future in the sport of mixed martial arts. Of course, Jones would prove pundits correct by capturing the UFC light heavyweight title at the age of 23, thus becoming the youngest champion in the promotion's history. The man he defeated to capture the title was Mauricio Shogun Rua. These two legendary fighters clashed at UFC 128, in what turned out to be a very one-sided affair. While Jon Jones was a slight betting favourite heading into the bout, few fans expected to see the young up-and-comer win the contest so easily. Throughout the fight, Jones used both his superior wrestling and his unorthodox striking to overwhelm Shogun for the better part of 3 rounds. When Shogun wasn't struggling to fight Jones off his back, he found himself getting completely outclassed in the striking exchanges. Jones kept the pressure on Rua until eventually securing a TKO victory midway through the 3rd round. The win marked a new era for the lightweight division, and the start of a historic run as champion. Number 6. Renan Barao, UFC 173. Though his career has been on a downward trajectory for several years now, in the not too distant past, Renan Barao was regarded as one of the top pound-for-pound fighters on the planet. Back in 2014, Renan Barao was the undisputed UFC bantamweight champion, riding a massive 32-fight winning streak. He was also coming off of a TKO victory over Uriah Faber, a man who many believe to have the best chance of dethroning Barao. That was of course except for Dominick Cruz. Given his resume, most pundits expected Barao to have little trouble with a relatively unknown fighter by the name of TJ Dillashaw. However, most pundits were wrong. In May of 2014, at UFC 173, Dillashaw and Barao met for the first time inside the octagon. Shockingly, the opening round saw Dillashaw land a massive shot that had Barao in serious trouble. From there, any momentum that Barao had going for him quickly turned in Dillashaw's favour. Dillashaw continued to outstrike his opponent by a sizable margin, putting on one of the most impressive performances in title fight history. Following over 20 minutes of domination, Dillashaw ended the contest with a 5th round TKO victory, and the result would go down as one of the biggest upsets in the promotion's history. Number 5. Eddie Alvarez, UFC 205. At UFC 205, Conor McGregor looked to add his name to the history books by joining the shortlist of fighters who have held titles in multiple weight classes. To accomplish this feat, the notorious one needed to get past reigning lightweight champ Eddie the Underground King Alvarez. While oddsmakers had McGregor as a slight favourite, most expected the contest to be fairly competitive. Well, it wasn't. Despite having a solid grappling pedigree, the Underground King strangely decided to try and outstrike the Irishman, which, as you'd expect, played right into McGregor's hands. The Dublin native knocked Alvarez down on multiple occasions, leaving little question as to whose stand-up game was superior that evening. In the end, McGregor secured a 2nd round TKO victory on his way to becoming the first fighter in UFC history to hold 2 titles simultaneously. While McGregor has had no shortage of stellar fights, his performance against Eddie Alvarez is perhaps the most impressive of his career. Number 4. Junior Dos Santos, UFC 155. Back in November of 2011, UFC heavyweight champion Cain Velasquez's title reign and undefeated streak ended in dramatic fashion when he was knocked out early in the 1st round by Junior Dos Santos. However, at UFC 155, Velasquez would get his chance to prove that the first fight was nothing more than a fluke. And when the dust finally settled, he managed to do just that. Velasquez not only defeated JDS, but thoroughly dominated him for the majority of 5 rounds. What was thought to be a competitive fight on paper turned out to be a one-sided beatdown from Velasquez, who battered his Brazilian rival until the final bell. The win was so convincing that one judge even scored the fight 50-43 in favour of Velasquez. The two men would meet again for a 3rd time at UFC 166 in 2013, and this memorable heavyweight trilogy would end with Velasquez securing a 5th round TKO victory. Number 3. Tim Sylvia, UFC 68. On paper, Randy the Natural Couture's chances of recapturing the UFC Heavyweight Championship at UFC 68 didn't look good. His opponent, Tim the Maniac Sylvia, entered the bout with over 11 inches in reach advantage, over 6 inches in height advantage, and also happened to be roughly 12 years younger than the Natural. However, despite having the physical edge on paper, Sylvia was no match for the 43-year-old Hall of Famer. Couture landed a big shot that sent Sylvia to the mat in the opening seconds of the contest, and from there he never looked back. Randy Couture used his world-class grappling skills to control a much larger opponent, and was awarded a decision victory in what turned out to be an extremely one-sided bout. In doing so, Randy Couture also became the oldest champion in UFC history. Number 2. CARLA ESPARZA, UFC 185. Following an impressive showing on the Ultimate Fighter reality series, in which she managed to capture the inaugural Women's Strawweight Championship, CARLA ESPARZA appeared to have separated herself from the division. However, Poland's own Joanna Jędrzejczyk quickly reminded fight fans that looks can be deceiving. At UFC 185, Jędrzejczyk was set to take on CARLA ESPARZA for the gold, in what was expected to be a classic grappler versus striker showdown. In this particular instance, it was the striker's night to shine. When CARLA attempted to initiate her usual game plan and take Joanna down, her efforts were mostly unsuccessful. Joanna's solid takedown defense allowed her to keep the fight standing and tee off on CARLA ESPARZA at will. Before long, Joanna had CARLA pressed against the cage and began unloading with some brutal shots. The Polish native would go on to pummel the champ for the better part of 2 rounds before the referee decided to step in. The victory would end up being a star-making performance for Jędrzejczyk, who would go on to have the longest title reign the division has ever seen. Number 1. Ronda Rousey, UFC 193. Leading up to what would prove to be one of the most memorable fights in all of mixed martial arts, most folks expected to see a dominant performance when challenger Holly Holm clashed with undefeated champion Ronda Rousey. However, it was widely believed that Rousey would be the one doing the dominating. Of course, things turned out much different than oddmakers expected, as the preacher's daughter managed to pull off one of the biggest upsets in combat sports history. Holm not only defeated the former Olympic medalist, but she completely outclassed her in the striking department. Holm used her elite boxing skills to tag Ronda Rousey with multiple left hands, and even scored a brief takedown in round 1. The contest was of course highlighted by a devastating head kick in round 2 that sent Rousey crashing to the mat, in turn signalling the end of an era in women's mixed martial arts. The title win would wind up being the defining moment of Holly Holm's career, catapulting her into a mainstream star seemingly overnight. As always, if you guys enjoyed this video, then please be sure to let me know by leaving a like and subscribing to our channel. Apart from that, thanks so much for watching guys, and we'll see you on the next video.